Hi, it's Morgan with 1455. It is our mission to advance the art and craft of the written word and to build a dynamic and innovative creative community. We offer a variety of free online and in person programs, which are fully supported by our sponsors and by viewers like you. If you would like to make a donation of any amount, please visit 1455litarts.org and click support. Your contribution will be greatly appreciated. We'll see you on the next one.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for checking us out tonight. I'm Sean Murphy. I'm the executive director of 1455. I'm thrilled and honored to continue our author series. It's usually once a month. Sometimes it's even more. Since we've shifted to virtual programming, we've had the opportunity that we've seized, which is to provide more free content. By way of introduction, if you're not familiar with 1455, we're a nonprofit literary organization that our simple and profound mission is to celebrate writers and writing by any means necessary, but primarily through our free programs. And like I said, in 2020, we have been disrupted like everyone else, but we've shifted to a virtual platform, which frankly has enabled us to reach more people. So we're trying to lean into this and be as positive as possible. Our keynote event is our annual Summer Literary Festival, which is where our guest of honor this evening and I first connected. We also have a series called the 1455 Interview, where I have brief conversations with writers. Douglas and I spoke less than a month ago for that. Both of those events were recorded, and you can find those on our website. But we're all about building community, nurturing the writers community, as well as the reading community. And in order to do that, it's really important to have meaningful partnerships. So I'm really honored to collaborate once again with our good friends at DC's historic The Potter's House. And we're joined tonight, as usual, by Talia Jaffe, who is here to say a few words. Talia, it's wonderful to partner with The Potter's House. Please say a few words about your awesome organization and, importantly, how people tuning in tonight can get copies of this and other books.
As always, Sean, it's such a pleasure to partner with you all. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Talia Jaffe, the Events and Operations Manager at the Potter's House. We are delighted to have you all here and to welcome Douglas, and are so grateful for our rich and growing partnership with 1455 Literary Arts under Sean's skillful leadership. For those of you who don't already know the Potter's House well, welcome. And for those who are old friends, we're glad you're back. For those who are newer to the Potter's House, we are a nonprofit social enterprise, a bookstore, cafe, and event space. And we've been serving up radical hospitality in the Adams Morgan community since 1960. We have always been a hub for conversation, action, and activism and community transformation. As you can imagine, our role as a community connector looks a little different these days. Interactions in the shop and online have become even more precious, and our commitment to hospitality continues. To give you just one example, through our Pay It Forward program, we gave away 1,000 free meals last month to neighbors who would have otherwise gone hungry. That's just one manifestation of our commitment to hospitality, and it's one we intend to continue. And so are gatherings like this one. While we can't gather in person, we're still working hard to find ways to bring folks together, and tonight's event is one of them. We're especially thrilled to have Douglas here with us this evening because his debut Booker Prize winning novel is nothing short of a masterpiece. Shuggie Bain gives humanity, warmth, and love amidst our cruel and broken world, what we aim to do at the Potter's House each and every day. For me, as a queer person, the story of otherness getting so much attention is so incredibly important, and I'm really excited for you all to experience this story with us tonight. Shuggie Bain is deservedly back-ordered, and we are doing our best to get it in stock as fast as we can. If you stop by the end of next week, we should have copies. In the meantime, you can have it delivered to your door while still supporting the Potter's House when it becomes available again through our partners at bookshop.org. I will drop the link for you to order the book shortly in the comments. Again, thank you to all of us for joining, and especially Douglas and Sean for taking time out of your evenings for what I know will be an incredibly meaningful dialogue.
Talia, thank you so much. And we'll make sure that we put links to Potter's House and all the different places that we post this, as well as the website. But thank you for being there, and thank you for your support and friendship. So, okay, without further ado, let me introduce a man who at this point probably needs no introduction, but it gives me great pleasure to read this bio. So let me briefly introduce Douglas. He is a Scottish-American author, and his debut novel, Shuggie Bain, was a finalist for the National Book Award and the winner of this year's Booker Prize. It is to be translated into 11 languages. Probably that number is going up at this point. He wrote the novel over a 10-year period and is currently at work on his second novel, Loch Awe. His short stories, Found Wanting and The Englishman, were published in the New Yorker magazine. His essay, Poverty, Anxiety, and Gender in Scottish Working Class Literature, was published in LitHub. Born in Glasgow, Scotland, he has an MA from the Royal College of Art in London, and since 2000 has lived in New York City. So, opening remarks, Douglas, thank you for being here. Congratulations on your honor, and add me to the growing list of people who were gutted, restored, and inspired by your brilliant novel. It's a genuine honor to have read it and be able to talk to you again. And I really appreciate you now being a very busy and wanted man, taking the time to come chat with us. I know I've been hearing feedback from various channels. Everyone's been looking forward to this. So very warm welcome and thanks for being here.
Oh, Sean, thank you so much for having me, and to Talia too. And I'm glad the book broke you and then restored you, because that's what art should do. Thanks for having me.
Indeed. I think, we touched on this a little bit in the 1455 interview, kind of this, big themes. And this is it, in so many of the interviews that I've been conducting this year, we're talking about, and I think understandably, how attention spans are short. It needs to be, brief. It needs to be punchy. We need to jump in and jump out. And here is a novel that goes deep and stays long and really requires the reader to meet it on its own terms. And I think it's fair to say, as both a fan and a critic, as a reader and a writer, that you cannot make those demands unless the writing stands up to the challenge. Clearly, I am not alone in celebrating that was the case. I couldn't get enough of it. And it was one of those rare books where at a certain point you realize it is going to end and you start to get a little depressed because you know that you're not gonna be able to spend that time. But I think it being a deep dive, it takes you there and keeps you there, and then it stays with you. So I think the best way to kind of open up the conversation in terms of what this book is about, for those that haven't read it yet, what you're all about, and what you have done and continue to do, it kind of is giveaway from your bio, right? Talking about poverty, anxiety, and gender in Scottish working class literature. In terms of calling one shot, that kind of tees it up. But maybe you could talk a little bit about this novel, which was a long time in the making, and what you sought to do, and looking back 10 plus years after and being an award-winning novelist, how does what you see now jive with what you started out trying to do all those years ago?
Thank you. That's a good question. Funnily enough, I set out just to write a very intimate love story. It's the essay that I wrote for LitHub is very easily, it was easy to put a title to that about gender, anxiety, and poverty. But at the end of the day, I was only writing about the people I love in Shuggie Bain and the world I grew up in. And it didn't necessarily occur to me that it was different to the world that other people grew up in, or that it was othered in that way. I was writing from a place of personal experience, and also from a place of immersion, wanting to share that with the reader. Shuggie Bain is a story of the Bain family, who are a very proud, hard-working, working-class family in 1980s Glasgow. But 1980s Glasgow was going through a tough time. It was the height of the Thatcher government, who closed all industry, heavy industry, across the country. But because a lot of it was concentrated in Glasgow, we saw unemployment go up to about 26% and then stay there for a generation. It really affected the working class mainly, and so I think actually the number was much, much higher. When hope evaporates from communities like that, we know that really dark, sticky things rush in, whether it's addiction, whether it's vulnerability. And in Glasgow particularly, it took life expectancy down by 14 years, which is an enormous number in the developed world, in the 5th richest nation in the world. But Shuggie Bain I didn't actually set out to write a polemic or a social novel. I set out to write a love story. It is about Agnes Bain, who is the proud, defiant, determined, sometimes exhausting mother of the Bain family and her 3 children. Agnes is chafing at the smallness of her life, and she's a woman that wants a little bit of glitz and a little bit of glamour, but the circumstances they live in aren't going to afford that. She has married the wrong man. She's married across sectarian lines. As a devout Catholic, she's married a Protestant, and it turns out he's a very bad man. After he promises some of her small dreams to come to life, he actually abandons her and maroons her and her 3 children in a coal mining town in North Lanarkshire, which is a region just outside of Glasgow, just as the Thatcher government is dismantling it. When Agnes is abandoned, she starts her descent into addiction. And it's a look at how her 3 children and the community around her are affected by that. It's her youngest son, Shuggie, who the book is named after, who stays by his mother's side the longest. But Shuggie is going through his own things. He is very quickly othered by the community around him. Without having any sense, a very young boy, without having any sense of his body or sexuality, he's just told he's no right. Why are you like that? Why are you effeminate, precocious? And so he's sort of pushed to the side. And so really all I tried to do was write this story about these 2 gentle, tender souls clinging to each other as the patriarchy and as this hard world swirls around them.
Indeed, and I mean, I think it's clearly a love story, and yet in the best possible way, it's so much more than that. And I think, you know, we always want to avoid in our writing and our assessment of writing cliches and lazy descriptions. So typically, I think writers understandably chafe at the assumption that protagonists are the writers and vice versa, because often that's not the case. But I think it's fair to say, in this particular story, this comes from a very personal space, both literally and interior wise. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about how your experience informed kind of the urgency and the love and the real kind of eyewitness kind of testifying that you do to your place of birth.
Yeah, I might be one of the few writers you'll ever meet that doesn't sort of chafe at being recognized as sort of drawing from the well of my life. I think that's a thing that's often used as a stigma against working class writers or working class voices, because then we're seen as not being able to project our imagination beyond that, because perhaps we don't have the education or the creative writing training. But other people's notions of that only hold you back as a writer. And so I just reject all of it, mostly. But it certainly, I grew up in Glasgow as the queer son of a single mother. And it was a time in Glasgow, my mother suffered from alcoholism for my entire childhood. And when I was a teenager, when I was in high school, she died of it one day, very quietly while I was at school. And so her addiction informed my entire life, but so did her love. You know, and I grew up understanding that addicts or alcoholics were incredibly complex people. Sometimes I sort of chafe when reviewers say the alcoholic mother or the queer son or these people that are in the book. And actually the characters are far more than that. Agnes is a woman who is determined, who has dreams, who likes glamour, who's a great friend. And I spend the first part of the book showing her as a mother, as a daughter, as a friend, as a foe, before we even understand she has a problem with drink. And that's the truth of it. You know, I'd always known the people I loved, not just my mother, but everyone, other women and men in the community, to be fully rounded human beings who were suffering with addiction. And so that was part of the portrait I wanted to create with Agnes. But Glasgow was an incredibly difficult time, and it says a lot about the stoicism of Scottish people that we don't ever share that sort of trauma or that trouble. You know, especially as a man from the west coast of Scotland, you're never encouraged to express yourself or your finer feelings. And anyone that wants to read about that in a bit more depth, Deborah Orr wrote a fantastic book called Motherwell that just talks about the patriarchy almost from the top down, how it harms men, and then how it's women and children that really, really suffer under it. But you're never supposed to think of yourself being part of a working class or a chorus of lives. You're never allowed to think of yourself as exceptional, either exceptionally great or exceptionally hard done to. And actually that's, you know, it's a little bit antithetical to how Americans think, you know, because there is such a spirit of individualism in this country. But in Scotland, it is about collectivism. And so I wanted to, first of all, I think only coming to America and being an immigrant here allowed me to look back with a sense of clarity and a sense of longing and really create this book. But I also wanted to, I think I was feeling like two separate people, Sean. And so writing the book was a way of sort of stitching back together two halves of my life and sort of conjuring the Glasgow of the 1980s.
And I promise we've got a lot to talk about in terms of working class lit, and the way that this is so wonderfully rendered. But if you will indulge us, I think that's a perfect segue for the reading that you prepared, which talks both about Agnes and her son, the namesake of the novel. We would love you to share some of that and really kind of set the tone.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Sorry, I apologize for the state of my book. It's well earmarked. But this actually comes from the beginning of the book. And this is where we meet our fierce, calamitous heroine, Agnes. It is Friday night in one of the high-rise towers in the center of the city. Glasgow went under a huge rejuvenation project in the 50s and 60s where they tore down all the tenements and then they built these very cheap public housing estates or schemes that about 10, 15 years later started to fall into such disrepair and didn't stand the test of time. It has subsequently been torn down, I'm grateful to say, but she is having a card party, or a menage party as we call it in Glasgow, with her female friends. This is Agnes. Chapter 2. Agnes Bain pushed her toes into the carpet and leaned out as far as she could into the night air. The damp wind kissed her flushed neck and pushed down inside her dress. It felt like a stranger's hand, a sign of living, a reminder of life. With a flick, she watched her cigarette dout fall, the glowing embers dancing 16 floors down onto the dark forecourt. She wanted to show the city this claret velvet dress. She wanted to feel a little envy from strangers, to dance with men who held her proud and close. Mostly, she wanted to take a good drink, to live a little. With a stretch of her calves, she leaned her hip bone on the window frame and let go of the ballast of her toes. Her body tipped down towards the amber city lights and her cheeks flushed with blood. She reached her arms out to the lights, and for a brief moment she was flying. No one noticed the flying woman. She thought about tilting further then, dared herself to do it. How easy it would be to kid herself that she was flying until it became only falling and she broke herself on the concrete below. The high-rise flat she still shared with her mother and father pressed in against her. Everything in the room behind her felt so small, so low-ceilinged and stifling, payday to mass day, a life bought on tick with nothing that ever felt owned outright. To be 39 and have her husband and her 3 children all crammed together in her mammy's flat gave her a feeling of failure. Him, her man, who when he shared her bed now seemed to lie on the very edge, made her feel angry with the littered promises of better things. Agnes wanted to put her foot through it all, or to scrape it back like it was spoilt wallpaper, to get her nail under it and to rip it all away. With a bored slouch, Agnes fell back into the stuffy room and felt the safety of her mammy's carpet below her feet again. The other women hadn't looked up. Peevishly, she scraped the needle across the record player. She clawed at her hairline and turned the volume up too loud. Come on, please, just the one wee dance. No yet, spat Nan Flanagan. She was feverish and arranging silver and copper coins into neat piles. I'm just about to pimp out the lot of you. Reenie Sweeney rolled her eyes and held her cards close. You've one filthy mind. Well, don't say I didn't warn you. Nan bit the end off a slab of fried fish and sucked the grease from her lips. When I'm done taking all your menage money at these cards, you're going to have to go home and fuck that bag of soup bones you call a husband for more. No chance. Reenie made a lazy sign of the cross. I've been sitting on it since Lent, and I've no intention of letting him get at it until next Christmas. She pushed a fat golden chip into her mouth. I once held off so long I got a new colour telly in the bedroom. The women cackled without breaking their concentration on the cards. It was sweaty and close in the front room. Agnes watched her mammy, little Lizzie, carefully studying her hand, flanked by the bulk of Nan Flanagan on one side and Reenie Sweeney on the other. The women sat thigh to thigh and tore at the last scraps of a fish supper. They were moving coins and folding cards with greasy fingers. Anne-Marie Easton, the youngest amongst them, was concentrating on rolling mean-looking cigarettes of loose tobacco on her skirt. The women spilt their housekeeping money on the low tea table and were pushing 5 and 10 pence bets back and forth. It bored Agnes. There was a time before baggy cardigans and skinny husbands that she had led them all up the dancing. As girls, they had clung to one another like a string of pearls and sang at the top of their voices all the way down Sucky Hall Street. They'd been underage, but Agnes, sure of herself even at 15, knew she would get them in. The doorman always saw her gleaming at the back of the line and beckoned her forward, and she pulled the other girls behind her like a chain gang. They held on to the belt of her coat and muttered protest, but Agnes just smiled her best smile for the doorman, the smile she kept for men, the same one she hid from her mother. She'd loved to show off her teeth back then. She got her teeth from her daddy's side, and the original Campbell teeth had always been weak. They were a reason for humility in an otherwise handsome face. Her own adult teeth had come in small and crooked, and even when they were new, they'd never been white because of the smoking and her mammy's strong black tea. At 15, she had begged Lizzie to let her have them all taken out. The discomfort of the false teeth was nothing when compared to the movie star smile she thought they must give her. Each new tooth was broad and even and as straight as Elizabeth Taylor's. Agnes sucked at her porcelain. Now here they were, every Friday night, these same women playing cards in her mammy's front room. There was not a single drop of makeup between them, and nobody had much of a heart to sing anymore. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, for those that haven't yet read the book, you describe it again and again as a love story, and I think again, just from that passage, it's clear what you mean by that. I think the different layers of love, though, also show in this excerpt. It's the love of a woman. It's the love of a type of woman. It's the love of a type of class, and it's a celebration of resisting the darkness and the easy solutions, and this notion of perseverance throughout odds that just continue to be stacked. I think what really shines through the narrative and what you're able to achieve is a genuine celebration and respect. You've lived amongst these people, you know these people, you are these people. And so it's a love story of sorts to this hardship.
Yeah, I think so. And I think love can often be difficult. It doesn't have to be fawning and full of compliment to be love. You know, the heart of the book is about a son's unconditional love for a very flawed parent. And I think only children can have that resilient, hopeful, suffocating, smothering love for parents, and it's a beautiful thing. But that is the beating heart of the book. But also the love that the women have for each other, the friends have, and then Agnes has for her children, and then broken love as well. I mean, Agnes is a woman who would have been told by society growing up in the 50s and 60s that she would have had to leave her father's home and find a husband and then have children, and what she could have hoped for was having the nicest council house, government assisted house that she possibly could, and to keep that well. In writing the book, I did a lot of research, and at the time that Agnes was a character, only 0.033% of the working classes had access to higher education. And if you slice that even further, I'm sure for women that was practically none. And so this was Agnes's life, and she goes through the book in a lot of ways, and she's sort of used by men, and men also give her status in society. Women are suspicious of her when men don't love her, or when there's not a man at home, or where is your man, or where is that? And so in a way, even though it's a love story, it's often sometimes about how the cogs of love don't line up, or how they are used to hurt somebody, I suppose.
Yeah, and I can't let our conversation go without hearkening back to the 1455 interview where you mentioned / confessed that you had not read much of any Dickens, and I have to say, having read the book, again speaking of cliches, but when you're going to go big and you're going to invoke the greats, it's astonishing to me, but also it elevates, I think, what you achieve, which isn't to say that this is Dickensian in an imitative way, but rather the scope and the description and the dirt under the reader's fingernails. You do so much justice, not just on a kind of narrative exposition level, but having never been to Scotland, I could smell and taste and feel that town and really understand both the things you see in the States, the things you see everywhere that are certainly typical to a less prosperous section of town, but you really can smell and taste the desperation and the sense that there's no way out, even for the husband who's a rascal and a schemer. The futility even amongst these people of the system that they're up against, and how there's really no way out for anyone, and it's every person for themselves to try to find that way. And I think one of the reasons Agnes faces such resistance and envy is because she refuses to take the path of least resistance. She's got her pride.
That's right. She has a sense of self-worth. And, I haven't read Dickens, and it's such a funny thing, but we've spoken before, and I'm a huge fan of Thomas Hardy. I didn't read any books as a kid. I grew up in a house without books. And so I kind of missed the Dickens years where you get it as a kid and you're sort of taken through A Christmas Carol and things like that. And, but Thomas Hardy had such a formative influence on me. And in a way, Tess of the D'Urbervilles has an echo in the book, but also Jude and his hoping and his wanting is present also in Agnes, in her thwarted fate. But it's not a book about good or bad people. It's a book about people who are going through good and bad times. And some of that is reflective of the Glaswegian spirit, and some of that is also the working class spirit. It's funny because sometimes people say to me, oh, the book has a lot of sad things in it. And I think to myself, well, I wasn't actually ever aware that some of it was sad, because you deal with a life that's in front of you. And it's only when you when you grow up and you manage to reflect back and compare it with peers or understand how other people grew up, that we also understand on some level, oh, that was weird, or that wasn't, or that was great, or that wasn't great. It's only when we really get to that point. And so the characters don't go through the book with any sense of, why is this happening to me? And actually, the few times that Agnes sort of gets a little maudlin and gets stuck in her poor me's, the community around her says very quickly, like, shake yourself out of it. And that is part of the irrepressibleness of the Glaswegian spirit. Although the book has sadness in it, it has an awful lot of humor and also tenderness. Sits cheek by jowl with violence. And Glasgow's always been that kind of city. It's just jam-packed with humanity and empathy, but it's not a city you can view from a distance. When you're in it, it comes at you very sort of thick and fast, and that was what I wanted to sort of show in the book. But I wrote the book, Sean, as you say, for the characters in the book. So I'm always relieved when people in America or in London or anywhere else say, oh, I could see and feel and smell and taste it and understand it, because my duty as a writer was to service the characters first. I'd never had any concept. I couldn't project myself into the mind of a reader or what they would think. And I think especially as a working class writer or someone who writes about a working class narrative, it's so far away from middle class or upper middle class literary circles that I just couldn't even project there. So I didn't even bother. And at the end of the day, I wrote with a sense of truth for the characters at the heart of the book.
For sure. And, let's tease that out a little bit, because we talked about it briefly in the 1455 interview, but I think you and I both are so glad to talk about and celebrate what I think Shuggie kind of is the wind in the sails of what we're seeing. I think for a variety of reasons, all of them good and all of them necessary, more focus, an increasing focus and desire to understand what we would maybe call working class lit, which we said at the outset has traditionally gotten short shrift for a variety of elitism. It doesn't take place in New York City, or it's not a college professor on his third marriage, interior dialogue. We're talking about, real things. But if I were to offer one reason why I think there's a keen urgency, aside from the very real brilliance of the book, which speaks for itself, I think what we've been dealing with in the States the last 4 or 5 years has underscored this disconnect, and people finally beginning and looking to art to help explain, why is there so much anger, and where does this disconnect come from? And there's not one obvious answer, but one answer certainly is when people are disenfranchised, things like drink and drug and violence follow. And you certainly, I think the kind of the creeping ghost of Shuggie is this pervasive disenfranchisement amongst the men who no longer have their identities and no longer have their jobs. And as a reader, I think one is tempted to say, well, of course, it doesn't excuse the horrific, acts, but you take away people's livelihoods and their personalities, and certainly bad things are going to follow. But all of which is to say, I certainly think for any American reader wanting to understand the exact time that you write in, absolutely as a set piece. But to understand where we are now, even in the States, I think people could do worse than to see Shuggie, because there is a mirror being held up in terms of kind of systemic failure of government.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. And the core themes of Shuggie are love and hope and survival. And that's as true in Glasgow as it is in Philly and Detroit and Brooklyn. And so that's why the book's been able to resonate with people around the world, because forget what it's set, what the characters are going through is a universal story that we just don't talk about enough. I've been asked a lot in the past couple of weeks about Margaret Thatcher and The Crown, because when, I don't know if you've been watching it, Sean, but when you see her, she's a lion of a woman. She's an amazing character. She's bold and she's determined. But what you never see is the results of her actions. And it decimated an entire country and it ruined a generation. And it's important that we have representation in all facets of our media, whether that's television or in literature, because we're seeing how things are cracking apart and people feel sort of pulled to one side or the other, or feel left behind. But it's important in a way because we can't truly be having diversity conversations in literature if we're not talking about diversity in all of its facets. And that is often people who come from outside the middle class, or who make a bulk of this country, this American country, and I think 33% of the UK is working class. It's a huge amount of the population, and yet we're not 33% of literature or books or television or radio. And so it's about control, I think, and about representation. I never saw my own people on the page till I was about 24. And I was a big reader from about the age of 17. And I had to go in search of, first of all, queer people, because that was something that wasn't ever put in front of me as a young man. But then also just to see Scottish people, and then Scottish working class narratives, whether that's Irvine Welsh or Agnes Owens or Janice Galloway or Alan Warner. And I had to sort of discover it for myself. But when you discover that for yourself and what it means to you, is it makes you just feel like you have a place in the world, and that you have, it's about sharing experience. And it's good to read books to travel and to see things that you would never get to see. But it's also important sometimes just to feel like you're anchored in time somewhere and you've shared a parallel life to people around you. But when Shuggie first went out in the world, like only recognizes like. And the manuscript was rejected. My agent told me at first 20 times, but then it was 32 times. And then in the UK, it was rejected another 12 or 14 times. And a lot of the feedback was, who wants to read about these poor people in Scotland? And the truth is 33% of the population. Shuggie is currently #1 in the charts. It's #2, I think, here, or #3. And so an enormous amount of people want to read about it. But when you're trying to break into a publishing industry that is all these incredibly highly educated middle-class people who recognize themselves in the books and recognize each other, and then you sort of come at it from the outside, it's hard to wedge into that. And that's not to say there's not urgent working class literature being written every single day. I can only really talk about Scottish or Northern literature. And I stand amongst giants whose output is incredible. And oftentimes in the past couple of weeks, it's been very flattened, the narrative, to the last time Scotland won was in 1994, won the Booker, and now here's me 26 years later. And the truth is that's not what it is. There's 1,000 voices in between us who are doing really urgent, diverse works. It's just every so often the literary community sort of turns its eye and says, oh, look at this. And I think that's the power of the Booker. And so I'm hopeful that it will help lift people who come from outside of publishing, or outside of or who come from a regional or a queer or a working class point of view, and just sort of helps lift their narratives and makes people more curious about them.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you for all that. I want to say, correct me if I'm using the wrong term, but when one of the interviews, you're a hero to me. You talk about the notion of the poverty safari. And you talk about, some people can say, well, that's something that a upper middle class, or the literary community wants to dip in. And one of your goals with Shuggie was to say, if you're coming in here, we're not doing a drive-by. You will come out. You will confront some of this stuff. And again, I certainly, I want to celebrate, and I think the world is clearly celebrating the brilliance of the book speaks for itself, and the writing itself elevated it to where it is. But I do think that there are some kind of, it's resonating on the lower levels here in the States, because I think, like most things, we're newbies. We consider ourselves, the avatar of the Western world, but we're the babies on the block too. And I think, despite the cycles of how history goes, we're always a little bit behind. And now that we're seeing manufacturing go away, and we're seeing, I think collectively we're waking up, and that reverberates across art too. We're waking up to the effects of what happened in the 80s, and it happened here too with Reagan. And people are looking for answers, and maybe they should have been looking all along, but I think there's an extra urgency to try to understand, how did we get here? And often art does what the political, Diet Coke narrative cannot conjure up.
Yeah, I think it's also even telling, I thought I'd written a historical novel, and certainly the United Kingdom has unfortunately reminded me that it's not historical. We're taking free meals away from kids there. That's been reversed, but only by the intervention of real people. There's people falling through the poverty gap. Joe Biden, when he was talking about his presidency, would talk about all these things he would do, and in the middle of it, he would say, and we have 40 million people that don't have enough food to eat. And then we're going to build solar panels. And the way he sort of glossed over it, that 40 million people should be enough to stop any politician in his tracks. And that should be the entire purpose of the government, to make sure that in the richest country in the world, we are not leaving people behind. And we do it every day, and we don't like to look. The poverty safari thing is a really fascinating burden that is put on working class writers that isn't put on anyone else. We are sort of told from above, like I said, with the manuscript, who wants to read that? Oh, who wants to know that? And then from within our own class, we're also told, don't tell anybody that, because the shame's contagious. And so you're told very quickly, don't share that secret. Don't let them know that's how it is. And Agnes, actually, the character of Agnes is almost an embodiment of that, because even though she's disintegrating and her home life is difficult, she won't go over the front door without her hair being immaculately done, a face of makeup, and a coat she can't afford on her back. But that's her way of coping and rejecting shame. So we get those two sort of signals all the time, and still, even winning the Booker, I still get them. And the truth is that's incredibly difficult. So I knew when I wrote the book that if readers were going to engage in it, I was going to make it as an immersive a quality as possible. I wasn't going to, from my position, lead people through and angle the camera for them so they could take bits of it and leave. They were going to really sit in the room with the character. And this actually makes it sound like a bleak and a sad book, and it's not. It's a funny book. It's a loving book, but it's a humane book, I hope. I hope it's a book full of empathy. And I wanted it to be sort of packed with that human feeling in that way. And so, but I wanted to make sure that any reader that came felt altered by it. And even how I end the book, I wanted almost to hand Shuggie to the reader and say, what do you think is next? And leave them with a question like that.
Well, I was going to steer the direction and say, thank you for that segue. Although all of this is worthy discussion, we could go in a million different directions. Let's, by all means, talk a little bit about the kind, gentle, sweet, often tortured namesake, this wonderful creation, Shuggie. And if I may, if you will indulge me, and I can flatter you very sincerely, I could point to a number of passages. In fact, look at those rabbit. a lot of passages dog marked. But the short scene where young Shuggie has his Barbie doll, which of course speaks volumes, and drags it through the gasoline, hoping that the rainbow from the reflection comes through in the hair, is the most devastating, succinct. That's a novel in one scene. But in terms of introducing this character, let's talk a bit about where a lot of this hope comes from, and it's embodied literally by this wonderful little boy.
Children are the most wonderful creatures because they are so capable and resilient and have so much perseverance and love. And I wanted just to create Shuggie as that in a way. And also not just Shuggie, but Shuggie's surrounded by other friends of his, Annie and Leanne, who go through similar things that Shuggie is going through. And they're these sort of fonts of forgiveness and just these receptacles for love. All they want in the world is for their parents to be well and to be okay. And so Shuggie, for me, we follow Shuggie in the book we actually begin when he's 16, and we're looking almost at the landscape of his life and wondering what happened to this boy. And then we go back from when he's 5 and follow him back to when he is 16 again. And so he goes through a lot of changes in the book. At the beginning, he isn't very self-aware, and then he becomes self-aware, and then he has some very difficult decisions to make. But Shuggie is very quickly just othered. He spends his entire life with his mother, which with very few other children around him. And so that makes him precocious. It makes him watchful. It makes him sort of a bit weird around adults. And he is seen as being effeminate or having a love for dolls or the painted ladies, almost like the Vargas pinups on the side of lager cans. And he has just this love for it. And the community says, oh, you need to nip that in the bud. That's no right. Because as well as a very narrow way for women to be, there's an incredibly narrow way that men are expected to be. And Shuggie already, with his flamboyancy and his effeminacy, is seen as not being that. But I didn't want his queerness to be a capital Q in the book. It's just another thing that the character goes through. And I think for many kids, that's the truth. Sometimes it's the biggest thing, and that, sort of your sense of gay and how you hide that, it can be the biggest thing. But some kids have so many things going on in their life, good and bad, that it's just a sort of thread, a sort of weft thread running through their lives. And for Shuggie, that is true. It was an important thing to explore because it shows that the patriarchy harms both women and queer kids. But I didn't want Agnes to be so alone in the world. I wanted to show that she has this ally and this friend and this sort of banter partner that she talks to, but they're both sort of orbiting each other and finding out ways to survive. And I hope there's a poetry in how they cling to each other and how they love each other, but also how they see each other. The book is often about how people, through their lenses, don't understand Shuggie and Agnes, whether for being a woman that wants too much or for being a young gay boy. But without ever really expressing it, they both see each other very clearly. And I think that's the power of their love.
Absolutely. And I think it's clearly the one relationship, in the book that is unconditional, but also doesn't have, the trade-offs that most of us at whatever age are obliged to kind of accept. There is that love, and it becomes very clear that without the kind of quirky support that they each give each other, they wouldn't make it as far and as long as they do, because there's too much against them, and there's too little solidarity in the outside community. So that shines through, that they support each other in very unique and beautiful ways.
Yeah, and that was the joy of the book. That's the lovely thing to write. Actually, the parts that I love the most about the book are the intimate moments between son and mother. Even sometimes if there's a little bit of sadness or a tinge of sort of menace to it, we can see what's coming. It was still, that is the heart of the book. The book only started to sort of spiral out and capture socio-economic and political things and community things from that core heart. But at the end of the day, it is about, and also my favorite character in the book is actually Shuggie's older brother, Leek, who is this, he's a fair bit older than Shuggie, but in this world of very hard men who are violent and sexual, Leek is incredibly gentle and sweet. He's a heterosexual man. He looks out for his little brother. He makes a lot of sacrifices in his life without ever drawing attention to them or saying, I did this for you. And he just does it. He gives it. Because he loves both his mother and his brother. But he is this almost ghostly character. His way of dealing with his mother's struggle is to disassociate quite quickly. And so several times the other characters remark how he sort of almost floats out of the room backwards, or how he just sort of vanishes. But he, at the heart of the book, is this tender, gentle heart. And I wanted to put him there as well to show how he loved Agnes, but also to show that how the other men in the book are and how bad they can be.
Well, yeah, and the fact that the older kids have already been through things that Shuggie hasn't seen, so there's this amazing tension of them wanting to protect him and shield him, but also occasionally say to him, wake up, you need to learn some of these survival tactics, or you'll be doing this soon too. And there's kind of this, tragically world weariness to such young people that have obviously already had to deal with so much. And listen, I have to say, I mean, there wasn't a single scene in this very long book that was mawkish or rang false. But talk about a protagonist, right, that's up against it, impoverished, with a single alcoholic mother, and is gay. It ultimately is such a affirming story of it's a human triumph of will, really,
Yeah.
of the will to find your way through love, with love, through the darkest things that the world can put you up against.
Yeah, and I think that's the comment on Hope. And he is up against poverty and homophobia and his mother who is disintegrating, and he still triumphs. He still makes it through and comes out at the other end. But the comment of hope is, I think sometimes in literature, hope has to be a very bright thing on the horizon. And really, sometimes hope is just, okay, I'm going to get up and do tomorrow, and it'll be a little bit less bad than today was. It might be a wee bit better, but it doesn't necessarily always have to be this bright city on a hill. It can just be that resiliency, and I'll take tomorrow and I'll do tomorrow. And sometimes when you don't have money, that's what it feels like. You've got to take it as it comes. There's a line in the book that someone says something to Shuggie, and Shuggie was like, I can't worry about next Friday. I've got to worry about tomorrow first. And that's the point. He's going to take it as it sort of comes. And yeah, I guess that's the miracle of children. Shuggie was a real pleasure to write, as is Leanne and as is Annie, because I have real faith in them. I think they're going to be just fine in the world. I think they're going to bring a lot of love forth, and they're going to triumph eventually. But I'm going to put them through some tough times in the book, but they'll be fine, Sean. They'll be fine. I promise you.
Well, that is kind of tantalizing, because I believe I know exactly what you're saying, and I concur about the ending and the way you handled that. Could there be a desire to return to some of these characters, or is this a one and done narrative?
Right now, I don't have any desire to return to them. I'm working on my second novel, which is a totally different. I go into some of the same themes and some of the same issues. I think as a writer, I want to go deeper rather than broader. And so I'm really, truly looking at the harm that men do to other men. So much of Shuggie was focused on the harm that women were under in gay kids. And this is really about a man on man's world, this next book. How we force working class boys to man up, and we expect violence from them and sexuality from them and aggression from them. And so that's what I'm working on now. I don't think I'll return to Shuggie and Agnes. I wanted really to, after 10 years of writing the book, I wanted to give them both to the readers and say, please look after them for me. But I'm ready to give them over. Right on. As we say in the States, you left it all on the field. I left it all on the field, yeah. and convincingly. Well, returning back to kind of this recurring theme of whether it's the USA or Scotland or wherever, I do think another service that this narrative at this particular time serves is really, speaking on behalf maybe of the American intelligentsia. We do kind of have a navel-gazing, upper middle class, very white, very straight demographic, and a book like Shuggie is really kind of obliging people to recognize as human beings, times are tough, but boy, they could be a lot tougher. And I think it's a necessary corrective for a fairly narcissistic kind of literary class in America to kind of, it's always good to recognize, and certainly that pertains to Appalachia and the inner city here, but being taken across the ocean and across decades and recognizing, there's a lot of challenges, and this is how more people in the world live than not. Maybe it isn't time for another college professor on a, midlife crisis tour to the Big Chill to, reunite with his upper middle class. So that alone, I think, is also it's kind of this necessary reminder that we all could do well to look outside, these literary kind of cliches and platitudes and take a deeper dive into some things that explain, what makes the world really move around us. Yeah, I think it's just the greatest thing the greatest compliment I can receive from the book is when someone comes to it and it stirs a feeling of empathy inside them, or a feeling, certainly if they ever feel seen or they feel like they've come from a similar situation. I think so many of us actually do, and we're not allowed to ever discuss it or talk about it because there's such shame and stigma about poverty and or addiction and or queerness and or whatever it is. But when people who don't come from that world read the book, and it stirs in them a feeling of sort of, oh, I'm not paying enough attention. Someone on Twitter the other day, it was the smallest gesture, just said to me, you know, there's a Shuggie, just said to the world, there's a Shuggie Bain at the end of your road. And next time you walk to the end of your road, just stop and say hello, sort of thing. And she went on to say, you know, buy him a bar of chocolate for Christmas and do this other thing and do this. And it was the smallest human thing, and it made me cry, and I might cry again. But I just thought to myself, God, if that can be the power of books that make people just like stop and pause and care for one another, then I've not done a bad thing. Like I've achieved quite a worthwhile thing. And I think it's true. And the truth is I didn't realize I was diverse, Sean. I come back to that. And of course, the booker's got nothing to do with that. The booker chooses a book. They don't have any idea of everything the author is going to bring with them and their platform in the world. And certainly that final panel of all the novelists were so diverse. I mean, voices from Ethiopia, from you know, the Midwest, from Iowa. It was a beautifully diverse panel. But you know, I'm so thrilled that Shuggie won it, and that it's just making people focus on some of these issues at the moment, or helping them to.
Yeah, and you kind of already answered it, and your life is explaining it. But I think I would be remiss if I didn't ask the big question, which is, how is life different or changing since the Booker announcement?
Well, I actually haven't come off this sofa, so it's a question. People ask that, and I'm like, actually, it hasn't changed because I'm still stuck at home. It hasn't changed yet. It's still sinking in. I read all the long list and all the short list for the Booker this year because I realized it was such a career moment for me, even if I won or didn't. And I wanted to be so present, and I felt because of this tiny little camera that I wasn't present. I wasn't there. And I still, after winning it, still feels a little unreal. You know, I haven't met the other finalists in person. I haven't met the judges yet. Hopefully we're going to be able to rectify that in 2021. We're all going through the same thing. This is not about me. So it's still sinking in a way. But what I'm excited about is the vote of confidence in my career and the work that hopefully I'm going to bring forth now. But I've seen it give a boost to other writers around me who felt overlooked or rejected, or the publishing industry didn't know what to do with them. And I think that's the most important thing.
Right on. And I think I also would be remiss, particularly as it relates to the 1455 mission, to not spend a little bit of time really talking about and celebrating any book getting into print is an achievement. Any book finding its audience is an achievement. A book winning an award, et cetera, et cetera. But this book did not come quickly or easily. And you know, if you're too gentlemanly to do it, I'll do it for you. There is I think there is an extra champagne pop and football spike that a book that was rejected more than a few times ends up justifiably winning. But maybe talk a little bit about, you know, perseverance and you know, where you were at, because we've all been there, certainly at different levels, but when you were facing some of those rejections, you know, and you know, where your head was at in terms of, I know you were proud of the work you did, and that's everything, but we all still want to find an audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's nice to be loved. You know, it's nice to be accepted. We all want that as writers. You know, rejection's an important part of being a writer, and it's something that we face. It's something I still face. Shuggie is still being rejected by international publishers. It's still happening. So don't, you know, so adapting to that and learning perseverance and learning how to manage through it is really important, because you'll be rejected by agents, by editors, by magazine submissions, by critics, by readers. And so it's a really important thing. At the time, it's a very humbling thing, and it hurts. I think any writer would tell you that. It would be nice for everyone to love you. What I felt most most hurt by was when people would praise the book, and editors would say, this will win lots of awards, this will win, I just don't know how to market it. And that made me lose a little bit of faith in literature and a little bit of faith in books, because I'd come as a debut novelist, I'd come with this really naive notion that quality things find an audience and we will find a way to celebrate them. And I was reminded, as someone who comes from an industrial design background, that marketing is important everywhere. And I think they didn't know how to market this book, and that was a tough place to be. But rejection, we have to, as a writer, you have to learn to live with it. And also you have to learn to live with winning a prize or not, because the chances are is we won't. And what we have to do is just keep coming back to the page and write through it and write regardless of what's happening.
Right. And I think, while I the lesser angels of my nature want to keep it more on the, rub the faces and the haters and
don't do it.
the ultimate victory. I do think it's important, and I appreciate you acknowledging, I certainly talk about this a lot, the idea that as ugly as it is, the publishing industry is a business. And I think every writer, especially a writer with some decades of experience, can talk about those very conversations of the gentle, if not effusive rejection, where it's all down to, can we sell this? But the pat line that I use, which I think is genuine, is if I was in the position of having to put food on the table by how many books I could sell, I'd probably at some point be gravitating towards zombie novels as well, because if we know that's what's going to sell, that is what keeps the business going. But it is this crazy kind of catch-22 where I certainly believe, I'm not jaded, I've not become cynical. I genuinely believe that these agents and editors and booksellers want quality. They love nothing more than to promote good literature. But it's an ugly world out there across all industries. And I don't know what the answer, I don't think there is an answer other than good writing tends to find a way forward. And for writers, you have to keep writing, because rejection at your best is always going to be part of the equation.
Yeah, and really important part of the rejection is finding your champion. It is hard to publish a book for an editor and for a publishing house. It is hard to publish a middle-aged man's debut novel, to be totally honest, that comes from Scotland. It's really difficult. And so rejection was important for me, because you have to find someone who believes in your writing as much as you believe in it, because they are also going to face an uphill battle sharing it with the world. We're so inundated with voices, and it's such a noisy world that it's hard to make people sort of notice a book. It just really is. And as an author who published 2 weeks before the pandemic happened, to lovely reviews in the New York Times and the Washington Post, and then saw the world entirely swallow my book as it swallowed everything, I can tell you it's difficult. This is not an overnight success story at all. This has been even 2020 has been a real year of ups and downs. But the rejection was important, because I understood when I signed with Grove Atlantic and they wanted Shuggie that they loved this book, because they were the only people who offered on it, but also because it meant something very deeply to them. And they told me so. And so rejection serves you as well, because you are trying to find the other half of your amulet, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, and I think right now, I think another part of your journey going forward is you carry the mantle now of hero and mentor and inspiration. Any other words for the writers amongst the 1455 and broader community, the Potter's House community, that are now going to be looking to you and saying, okay, all that's good and well, but what advice do you have, for an aspiring writer, whether they faced rejection yet or not?
I think the best advice is always to write and write on. I see a lot of people say, read everything you can, and that is true, but also try and live. Try and experience the things that you're going to make your characters experience, or get as close to that sort of source material as you can. I think reading and reflecting the world and then writing about it is one way to approach it, but I think it's always important for a writer to live and to really bring that sort of life to the page also. I think also take your time with your work. We are in such an instant gratification generation, and we're always thinking about what the end result is and the finished thing. And the truth is maybe don't focus on that all the time. Maybe focus on the pleasure and the craft in front of you and put your whole self into that, and then take your time. The book will become a thing. It will get there. It will finish itself if you love every single stage of the way. And by the way, once you're done, you can't take it back. So really spend your time there, because that's what the pleasure of writing is.
Well, Douglas, what I think shines through in these conversations and in tonight's talk is that very thing, which is so critical, really, for especially the younger writers to see, which is if you're not loving what you're doing, both in terms of the writing period, but especially the material you're working on, how can you dare hope that an audience is going to like it if you aren't believing in it? So what I've talked to people about why I love this book so much and why I'm so happy to do my small part in celebrating this accomplishment is the novel, the story of the book is a triumph, right? But the story behind the story is also a triumph. And really, Douglas, you serve as a wonderful antidote to this, instant gratification, this notion that you either have it or you don't, and it happens. This is the slow burn of passion, an acquired expertise, faith, patience, rejection, perseverance, and it is a happy ending. But I think it's so critical for any reader and certainly any writer to understand and appreciate that. For most of us, it's a long haul, and you have to have that faith and perseverance. And if you put the work in, good things will happen. But if you don't put the work in, it's very unlikely that good things are going to happen. But I'm here certainly to celebrate that. It's so rare in this world that the good guy wins and a story that deserves to be celebrated gets that recognition. So for me as a fan, it's just so inspiring. And 2020 has been a roller coaster, but the trajectory of Shuggie Bain and Douglas Stuart has been an absolute bright spot in a very checkered year. So thank you for being that source of inspiration and all the success.
Sean, I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much for all your support and for amplifying voices everywhere. I'm blown away. Thank you so much.
Well, it's a pleasure. And I think I might have said this in the 1455 review. The only thing I say is 1455 might be a small mafia, but it is like the mafia. Once you're in, you can't get out. So let this not be the last time our paths cross.
Not at all.
I promise I will leave you alone. I've been all over you for the last couple of months. It's been my extraordinary pleasure, but please take some victory laps. I hope you're soaking it up. I know I've gotten familiar now. I know your couch as well as you do. We will get off our couches in 2021. But in the meantime, enjoy, savor, and know that you are inspiring writers all over the place. And it's just got to be a beautiful thing to be a part of. It's certainly fun to be on the sidelines cheering you on.
Thank you so much. It's my privilege. I mean, I'm such a lucky guy if that's what it is. Thank you.
Right on. Well, thank you for your time tonight. Folks, if you weren't here at the beginning, we will post links. Please visit the Potter's House. For understandable reasons, Shuggie Bain is on back order, but it is orderable and it will get to you by the holidays. So please support your independent bookstores and do whatever you need to do to get a copy of this book, get it in your life, share it with others. Like I said, 2020 has been an interesting year, but an absolute undeniable bright spot has been the story of this book and the book itself. So it's my great pleasure to celebrate it. Douglas, thanks for being here, and we'll talk to you soon, my friend.
Thank you so much, Sean. Look after yourself.
Okay, do the same. Cheers.
Thank you so much for joining us. Make sure you follow us on our social media channels to stay up to date with what's new for 1455. And also, we would like to ask for your support. We depend on champions like you to keep us going. Visit 1455litarts.org and click support to make a contribution in any amount. We'll see you soon.